The bright lights of the television studio hummed with a quiet energy, casting a warm and expectant glow over the polished stage. The air was thick with the scent of hairspray, expensive cologne, and the nervous excitement of three couples who were about to share their lives with a national audience. This was not just any game show, it was a celebration of new beginnings, a light-hearted exploration of the bonds that tie two people together in the sacred and often humorous covenant of marriage. One of these brides was rumored to check out guys at the gym when her husband was not looking, a playful secret waiting to be revealed. Her husband was going to find out, and so was the rest of the world, because it was finally time to play the Newlywed game. The music swelled, a catchy and upbeat tune that signaled the start of something wonderful. Out from the wings stepped Gary Kroeger, a man whose smile was as bright as the studio lights and whose charisma filled the room instantly. He adjusted his suit jacket and walked toward the center of the stage, waving to the cheering audience. Gary looked into the camera with a twinkle in his eye and began the introduction that millions of people had come to love. He welcomed everyone to the Newlywed game, explaining that the audience was about to meet three couples and discover just how well they truly knew each other. The premise was simple yet profound. Gary would ask each couple questions about one another, and correct answers would earn points. The couple with the most points at the end of the journey would win an incredible second honeymoon. Gary turned his attention to the first podium, where the first couple stood hand in hand. The woman was a 32-year-old receptionist with a kind face and a gentle demeanor. Beside her stood her husband, a 33-year-old computer analyst who looked both proud and a bit overwhelmed by the cameras. They had been married for 13 months, a period of time where the honeymoon phase was still very much alive, but the realities of daily life had begun to set in. Gary introduced them as Roxanne and Steve Stover, wishing them the best of luck as the audience offered a warm round of applause. Next to them stood the second couple. The wife was a 31-year-old administrative assistant with a sharp wit and a vibrant personality. Her husband was a 28-year-old truck driver, a man of significant stature who looked like he could move mountains if he needed to. They had been married for 11 months. Gary introduced them as Nastasia and Mark Threats. He could not help but remark on Mark's physical presence, noting that he was indeed a big guy, which prompted a friendly laugh from the crowd. Finally, at the third podium, stood the youngest couple of the evening. The bride was a 25-year-old law clerk with an air of intelligence and grace. Her husband was a 28-year-old physical therapy aide who seemed to radiate a protective and loving energy toward his wife. They had been married for only 1 month, the ink on their marriage license barely dry. Gary introduced them as Carrie and Chris Titano, offering a special word of encouragement to Chris as they prepared to start the game. The audience gave one more big round of applause for all three of today's newlywed couples, the energy in the room reaching a crescendo. Gary began the first round by turning to Carrie. He directed her attention to a screen where a pre-recorded clip of Chris was about to play. In the video, Chris began a sentence, "The strangest thing that my wife does in the morning is." The tape stopped there, and Gary challenged Carrie to finish her husband's sentence for 10 points. Carrie did not hesitate. She smiled and said that the strangest thing she does is drink diet soda. She explained that she needed the caffeine first thing in the morning and that coffee was simply too hot for her at that hour. It was a relatable and quirky habit, one that spoke to the small, everyday details that make a person unique. The game moved to Nastasia. Gary asked her to look at Mark on the screen. Mark's recorded voice filled the studio as he stated that he and his wife agreed her best feature was her thighs. However, when the moment of truth came, Nastasia had a different answer in mind. She mentioned beauty marks, while Mark stood there, 6 feet and 8 inches tall, trying to explain his reasoning. He told her that she always talked about wanting to lose weight in that area, but Nastasia playfully countered that she only needed to lose weight for her beauty marks. The interaction was filled with a gentle, teasing affection that showcased the comfort they felt with one another. Then it was Roxanne's turn to consider Steve's response. On a scale of 1 to 10, Steve had been asked to rate his own sexual technique. Roxanne, with a confident smile, guessed that he would rate himself a 9. When the truth was revealed, it turned out that Steve had given himself a 7. He explained that he did not want to brag and felt that his wife was the better judge of his performance. Gary laughed, noting that since she gave him a 9, He should be very happy. The audience cheered for Steve's modesty and Roxanne's high praise. The tables were then turned, and the husbands were asked to predict their wives' answers. Steve looked at the screen to see Roxanne. The prompt was about what Steve always does when Roxanne is on the phone. Steve guessed that he was usually eating, but Roxanne's recorded answer was that he always corrected her grammar. Steve admitted that he did it occasionally, maybe once or twice, but Roxanne insisted it happened all the time. It was a classic domestic disagreement, the kind of small friction that often turns into a long-running joke in a marriage. Mark then watched Nastasia on the screen. The question was about what Mark loves to brag to his buddies about. Mark guessed that it would be about making love to his wife, a bold and confident answer. However, Nastasia's answer was much more wholesome. She said he loved to brag about her cooking. Mark laughed, realizing he had misjudged the focus of her response. He admitted he loved to eat, but his previous answer had certainly made the audience chuckle. Gary teased him about his big old beauty mark, keeping the mood light and fun. Christopher was the last to go in this segment, looking at Carrie on the screen. The question was about the longest time they had ever gone without sex. Christopher guessed 2 weeks, and when the tape played, Carrie said the exact same thing. They had nailed it. Christopher joked that it had been the longest 2 weeks of his life, a comment that earned him a round of applause and 10 points for their score. Before moving to the next segment, the show took a brief pause. Gary mentioned the upcoming 8th annual Betty White Christmas, a marathon of fresh episodes featuring the beloved actress, starting on December 19th. It was a moment of holiday spirit, promising a stocking full of joy for the viewers. When the show returned, Gary took a moment to talk more deeply with the couples. He spoke with Chris about how he had made Carrie believe in love at first sight. Chris shared a beautiful story about meeting in San Francisco. They had wandered off into the hills together, and even though there was no music, they started waltzing. He described a perfect first kiss on her doorstep, where the height difference made their lips align perfectly. It was a cinematic moment that clearly defined the beginning of their life together. Nastasia then shared a less-than-perfect story about her wedding night. They had a bottle of champagne that they wanted chilled, but the hotel took so long that by the time Mark returned to the room, Nastasia was fast asleep. Mark described himself standing there with a towel over his arm and a bow tie on, only to find his bride in dreamland. He ended up drinking half the bottle by himself on the balcony, a memory that they could now laugh about with fondness. Steve shared a shocking story from their honeymoon in Maui. They had rented a condo where nothing seemed to work. While trying to heat up some soup, Steve touched the stove and received an electric shock that nearly sent him across the room. Roxanne confirmed the story, laughing as she remembered the ordeal. Fortunately, everything worked after that, and Steve recovered from the literal shock of his new marriage. Gary checked the scores. Roxanne and Steve, as well as Nastasia and Mark, had 0 points at that moment, while Carrie and Christopher had 20 points. Gary encouraged the trailing couples, promising that things would change soon. He introduced a multiple-choice round where matches would earn 10 points. Roxanne was asked if Steve believed he went shopping with her to have fun, make her happy, or ensure she did not spend too much. Roxanne guessed the latter, but Steve had actually said he did it to make her happy, even though he disliked shopping as much as she did. Nastasia was asked about Mark's reaction to suspicious food in the fridge. She thought he would want to throw it out, but Mark joked that she always tried to make him taste it first to see if it was still good. Carrie was asked about the hardest part of Chris acting out his sexual fantasies. She guessed it was getting her into the mood, but Chris had said it was getting her into the costume, a secret he admitted he had been too shy to bring up since they had only been married for a month. The questions continued with the husbands. Chris was asked if Carrie lived in fear of insects, the dentist, or her. Chris guessed insects, but Carrie's answer was herself, a playful nod to her own strong personality. Mark was asked how Nastasia would try to get out of a police ticket, crying, yelling, or flirting. Mark guessed crying, but Nastasia loudly proclaimed that she always flirts her way out of trouble, much to Mark's feigned jealousy. Finally, Steve was asked if Roxanne thought he would notice, sneak a peek, or stare at a well-endowed woman on the street. Steve guessed sneak a peek, which matched Roxanne's answer perfectly. They finally had their first 10 points on the board. Roxanne joked that it was okay for him to look at the menu as long as he ate at home, a piece of wisdom that resonated with the audience. As the game progressed into the next segment, Gary revealed some of the couple's secrets. This was the "That Is My Wife" segment, where husbands had to identify if a secret belonged to their spouse. The first secret was about a wife being addicted to her husband's kisses. Chris claimed it was his wife, and they shared a sweet kiss on stage. The next secret was about a wife lying about liking her husband's singing. Mark correctly identified that as Nastasia's secret, leading to a funny exchange about his vocal abilities. When Gary revealed the secret about a wife who checks out guys at the gym when her husband is not looking, Steve was quick to claim it. He explained that since she knows he looks at women, it has become a playful joke between them. They both agreed that the most important thing was that they both returned home to each other. Another secret involved a wife who loved to flaunt her toenails by walking barefoot after a pedicure. Chris correctly identified Carrie, who explained her love for showing off her pampered feet. One of the more humorous moments came when a secret was revealed about a wife opening her top and whispering a romantic invitation to the bedroom. Mark mistakenly claimed it, but it was not Nastasia. She joked that she was the one who had to show him things to get him interested. The final secret in this round was a fantasy about having a romantic encounter on a Harley-Davidson motorcycle while driving up the coast. Mark correctly identified this as Nastasia's fantasy, winning back some points and showing that he knew her adventurous spirit well. The climax of the show arrived with the final round. Gary announced that the winners would receive a fabulous second honeymoon to Mexico, specifically to the Camino Real Acapulco Diamond. The prize was a dream come true, offering a week of relaxation, sailing, and romantic views of the bay. The stakes were high. Roxanne and Steve had 140 points, Nastasia and Mark had 170 points, and Carrie and Chris were in the lead with 220 points. In this final rapid-fire round, Gary gave the wives choices like roll-on or stick, and ice cream or fresh fruit. The husbands had to match their wives' preferences. The point values increased with each question, starting at 10 and going up to 100. Through a series of quick answers, the scores shifted dramatically. Steve matched on stick deodorant and fresh fruit. Mark matched on ice cream and being a problem solver. Chris matched on ice cream and being a troublemaker. As they reached the final question worth 100 points, the tension was palpable. The choices were silent and sexy or whistles while he works. This single answer would determine the winner. Steve guessed silent and sexy, which Roxanne had chosen, bringing their total to 240 points. Mark also guessed silent and sexy, matching Nastasia and bringing their total to 270 points, putting them in the lead. Everything rested on Chris. If he matched Carrie's answer, he and Carrie would win with 320 points. If he missed, the threats would take the prize. Chris took a breath and guessed that he was the type who whistles while he works. The studio went quiet as Carrie revealed her card. It said silent and sexy. The audience gasped and then erupted into cheers. By a narrow margin, Nastasia and Mark threats had come from behind to win the game. The three couples gathered at the center of the stage. There were no hard feelings, only smiles and congratulations. Nastasia and Mark were beaming, already imagining their sunset views in Acapulco. Gary Kroeger thanked everyone for watching and playing, noting that they had made it a great day. As the credits began to roll and the music played one last time, the couples hugged, a testament to the fact that while the game was about points and prizes, the real win was the love and laughter they shared every day. The lights dimmed slowly, leaving the memory of a day filled with joy, honesty, and the enduring spirit of new marriage.